Welcome back to the channel. This will be the transfer tips for Fantasy Premier League heading into Game Week 4. We are in the middle of the first international break of this season, but nevertheless, I'll be discussing 11 players to buy, hold, sell and skip. And if you want to see an updated version around this time next week, covering 11 more players, including a 1-week punt and further injury updates, then let me know down in the comment section below. And like this video, let's get it to a 200 on YouTube. And we're closing in on 35,000 subscribers, so it'd be a pleasure to get to that goal very soon. And afterwards, we'll be reaching new goals in the future. You can see the most transferred in players at this point of the game week. Jack Grealish is top, and he has a lot of transfer activity with over 600,000 managers buying him in. I wouldn't recommend making early transfers with the international break. Injuries could happen and some late returns, of course, which could mean some benchings for significant FPL assets, and they will be covered in future podcasts as well. Antoine Semenyo is second, despite blanking in Game Week 3, and he has never scored or assisted against Tottenham, and also against his upcoming opponent Brighton, but in the long term, I think it's a great purchase. Enzo Fernandez is third. Joao Pedro, Ekitike and Gakpo make up the top 6, and of course Alexander Isak, a transfer record in real life. He is 7th, but I have to say that signing could make Gakpo and Ekitike less appealing. One of them could make way to the bench very soon, but maybe not in Game Week 4, of course. But if you are looking for a bit of a longer term pick, that might be a little bit less secure now after that record breaking transfer. So there's a lot to discuss, of course, over the coming weeks, and it'll all be covered on this channel. And keep your eyes peeled for UCL fantasy content. The first draft for the Champions League will be out very soon. Check all the links in the description, and I would highly recommend you join my Discord server for all the updates on FPL and UCL fantasy. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Several viewers have asked, when is the best time to buy Alexander Isak, or when can we finally consider him in our FPL teams? And I always talked about Game Week 4 following the conclusion of the transfer window. We'll see if Alexander Isak moves to Liverpool or stays at Newcastle. And of course, that 130 million transfer record has been confirmed, and I think that's a great signing up front. Liverpool needed more numbers and obviously a quality striker to lead that line. Ekitike has been doing a great job so far this season, but I think Alexander Isak takes it to another level. I don't think he'll start against Burnley away, and ultimately he hasn't had any preseason whatsoever. He's only been training individually, but I think he'll come in around Game Week 5 or 6, and I could see him starting in that Merseyside derby against Everton at home. Now, last season he scored 211 points. He hasn't featured so far in this Premier League campaign, but he had 36 big chances last season for Newcastle with 23 goals and 6 assists, and throughout the summer he was a template pick, but once it became evident that Newcastle would kind of axe him from the squad, his ownership has dipped dramatically, but he is now slowly creeping up following that transfer to Liverpool, and it's currently 5.4%, but I don't think he'll start against Burnley, so the best time to buy him, I think, would be Game Week 5 or 6, but he should finally be considered once again. And when you've got so many underperforming forwards like Ollie Watkins, that transfer looks very enticing over the next couple of weeks. So I think Alexander Isak will be a great signing for Liverpool. It might have repercussions for Salah in FPL, but I still think both of them will get over 20 goals in this Premier League season. It is early days, but I think Marcus Senesi has been the best 4-point family defender so far this season, and don't be surprised to see a price rise very soon. He has 1 assist, which came against Tottenham, a great pass there into the box for Evanilson, and the assist itself and the goal in general was a bit fortuitous, but Bournemouth should have won that game by 3 or 4 goals. They absolutely dominated at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and Senesi delivered 14 points in such a tricky away fixture, and Tottenham were in great form going into that game. So that's 25 points for the campaign. And in terms of defensive contributions, this is the biggest standout for the Argentine. 43 defensive contributions has meant that he has scored DEFCON points in every single Premier League match, which also includes Liverpool away. So even when he has a tough fixture, you can still salvage a return or get a few points on board. And whilst that didn't happen at Anfield in a 4-2 loss, you saw some very healthy returns in Game Weeks 2 and 3 against Wolves and Tottenham Hotspur. His other underlying numbers aren't particularly great. Only 1 shot. The XG is 0.11 and the expected assist is 0.09, but he is a centre-back after all, and at such a cheap price point with good fixtures coming up like Brighton, Leeds and Fulham, I think 1 or 2 clean sheets is possible. And you've also got Crystal Palace away in Game Week 8. I don't expect a clean sheet against Newcastle per se, especially with the Toon making some good signings up front like Nick Waldemade and Visser, but I still think Bournemouth will keep plenty of clean sheets over the next 5 game weeks, and if you couple that with defensive contributions, Marcus Senesi will be one of the best 4-point family defenders in the game. A more popular FPL transfer to reinforce that defensive line would be Daniel Munoz, and I would highly recommend him as a purchase. The next two games look very solid on paper, especially against Sunderland at home in Game Week 4. There is Liverpool, of course, looming in the next 3 game weeks, but afterwards it's Everton away and Bournemouth at home, and Daniel Munoz got an assist in the FA Cup final a couple of months ago. He is fairly fixture-proof, he can score defensive contributions, create chances, and offer plenty of attacking potential from open play. So I think with his low ownership at 10.5%, he's not going to be a massive differential compared to Senesi, for example, but he does guarantee returns in most game weeks this season, and at a 5.5 million price tag, I think he's a solid choice. He hasn't blanked so far this season. He got an 8-pointer against Aston Villa and 2 5-pointers against the likes of Chelsea away in Game Week 1 and also Nottingham Forest at home. So I think Daniel Munoz is a very good choice in the defensive line, but you've also got Chris Richards, Mark Gay, Tyrick Mitchell and Lacroix. So I think Crystal Palace are stacked with solid defenders in Fantasy Premier League, but the most appealing and exciting would be Daniel Munoz in the long term. He has 1 assist in this Premier League season, which came against Nottingham Forest in that 1-1 draw back in Game Week 2, with 2 big chances created and 19 FPL points. The expected assist figure is also very impressive, considering he's only played 3 matches so far this season with 0.80, and he's also made 2 key passes in the process. And also expect his shots to also rise over the coming weeks. He's only had 1 so far this season, but it has been inside the box, and he will have probably more than most defenders in FPL when it comes to getting into that box very late on and getting great opportunities for a right wing back. So I think in the absence or potential absence of Ismaila Sarr, Daniel Munoz could bum on even further forward against Sunderland and in other fixtures where Sarr might miss out, and Daniel Munoz will be one of the best assets you can buy for Game Week 4. If you still have Cole Palmer, I think he's worth keeping in Fantasy Premier League because the injury doesn't seem too serious, according to several reliable journalists like Simon Phillips, and it looks like the scans indicate that the issue is only minor. He missed the game against West Ham where he had that injury scare in the warm-up. He was pulled out of that starting 11, and he also missed the Fulham game, and on top of that he withdrew from the England squad. But I think several doctors and reports indicate that Palmer could be back for Game Week 4 against Brentford away, and I think he'll definitely start going into Game Week 5 facing Manchester United away from home. But at 10.4 million for an asset to miss 3 consecutive games potentially from the starting 11, that would be way too much, and that's why I discussed selling him in last week's Transfer Tips podcast. But if you still have him at this point and you've got the squad depth necessary and you might even bench him in Game Week 4, I think Cole Palmer is worth holding on to, and it could be a relative differential going into Game Weeks 5 and 6. And against Brighton last season, he scored 4 goals at Stamford Bridge. But in this Premier League season, he's only played 1 game against Crystal Palace with no goals and no assists, 4 shots and 3 FPL points. The expected assist figure is very low at 0.03 and only 1 key pass, but we can't judge too much from Cole Palmer because it's only 1 game worth of data, and he had an incredible Club World Cup, particularly in the knockout stages, helping Chelsea lift that trophy. So I think Palmer is worth holding on to in most situations. After missing the decisive penalty against Grimsby Town in the Carabao Cup, Bryan Mbeumo bounced back in a very positive way against Burnley in that 3-2 victory. He scored in that game and put in a great performance. He's got 1 goal so far this season, 8 key passes and 14 FPL points. His ownership is actually rising at this moment in time. It's currently 16%, but the next 2 fixtures are Man City away and Chelsea at home. And amongst the big 6, you could argue these are 2 of the worst teams defensively, but Chelsea are looking quite solid so far this season. They're second in the Premier League table, and Man City are definitely there for the taking, but they've also made that big signing of Donnarumma between the sticks, and he could start in the Manchester derby. And Man United have signed a goalkeeper themselves, and they've made some good acquisitions in the forward areas, but they haven't fully gelled yet. But the likes of Fernandes, Mbeumo and Cunha, if fit, would definitely pose problems to Manchester City. Now, Mbeumo has 7 shots in the box so far this season, 8 shots overall and 4 on target. The XG is 1.03 and the XA is 1.09, with 1 big chance created and a healthy number of key passes, as I talked about earlier. The long-term fixtures for Man United aren't too shabby, and against his former club in Brentford, going into Game Week 6, I could see Bryan Mbeumo scoring in that game. So whilst I don't think he's a purchase, if you have Bryan Mbeumo, he is certainly worth holding on to at this moment in time. I would be less convinced about Matheus Cunha following his injury against Burnley, and he was subbed off after 30 minutes, but Ruben Amorim provided a positive update after the match, and he said Matthias felt some tightness, likely in his hamstring. We took him off as a precaution because you can't risk making it worse. We're waiting for the scans to know more, but we hope it's not too serious. And to be fair, he hasn't given too much away from that, but I think most United fans and the journalists I've seen seem quite positive about this injury update, and he could be available by game week 4 or 5. But my initial reaction was to be subbed off so early on and to feel his hamstring like that, he could be out for a number of weeks, and that is still a possibility. But I think the best thing to do with Matthias Cunha is hold until we have more information. But he was the most impressive United attacker in the first 2 game weeks, and of course against Burnley that would have probably been Brian Mbeumo, who created a big chance for Amad Diallo, which he should have buried, and obviously he scored himself. But Matthias Cunha has no goals and no assists so far this season, 5 shots on target, 8 shots overall, and an XG figure of 0.82, and even the expected assists is something at 0.22, with 1 big chance and 3 key passes. But it all comes down to his fitness. If he's available against Manchester City, I think he's worth holding on to in many scenarios, and other alternatives like Ismaila Sarr might be unavailable. So you could argue that the pool of players in the midfield isn't as great as we probably thought in game week 1, but Antoine Semenyo would be a nice long-term acquisition, and I do recommend that sort of upgrade and transfer if, for example, Matthias Cunha were to miss out, and you also save 0.8 million in the process at the time of this recording. But Matthias Cunha could go down in price fairly soon. Last week, I was extremely bullish on Chris Wood. I thought he was going to score against West Ham, and the Hammers were certainly there for the taking, but they changed their formation and put in a great performance at the City ground and won 3-0. So my transfers were a complete disaster, as I'll talk about in my Transfer Plans podcast coming up very soon. But Chris Wood still has 2 goals this season, which both came against Brentford back in game week 1. The XG is still quite healthy at 1.59, and he has produced 17 FPL points, but he has blanked in the last 2 game weeks with 7 shots inside the box, 7 shots overall, and 3 shots on target, and only 1 key pass. But really with Chris Wood, just expect some goals there, but maybe not to the same level as last season, which is why I didn't start this campaign with him like I did in the previous season. But I think Chris Wood still has a lot to offer, especially in some of the upcoming fixtures like Burnley away and Sunderland at home. He even scored a hat-trick against his former club Newcastle several years ago, but the likes of Chelsea and Arsenal in the next 5 game weeks doesn't look particularly great, and he is benchable in game week 4, where he might not even start the game himself, and we could see Igor Jesus take that front line actually for Nottingham Forest, because we saw something similar at the Emirates last season. And with those long travel distances between New Zealand and England, we could see Chris Wood not start that game week 4 fixture, but ultimately for the next 3 or 4 game weeks, he is worth holding on to for the time being. Another transfer I made last week was Ismaila Sarr, and whilst he scored against Aston Villa, which he typically does, that's his 8th goal against the Villains throughout his career, he picked up an injury in the process, and now he is a major doubt for the next 4 to 6 fixtures. And we got an injury update actually from a Senegal journalist, and I'll talk about that very soon. But Oliver Glasner said after the match, we had to pay the bill today with 2 muscle injuries, Ismaila with a hamstring and Adam the abductor. Hopefully it's not too serious. We will make scans tomorrow so they can't go to the national teams, and then let's see. But I also saw a report over the last day or so that Adam Wharton will miss 8 weeks worth of action with that abductor injury. And with Ismaila Sarr, this was said by Pape Mahmoud Gay. So he said Ismaila Sarr will have to withdraw from the Senegal national team due to the hamstring injury sustained on Sunday. He is suffering from a grade 2 tear, and according to reports, a grade 2 tear in the hamstring requires weeks to months for a recovery, with typical timeframes ranging from 3 to 8 weeks, though it can be longer for more severe grade 2 injuries. So let's wait for official reports. So don't sell Ismaila Sarr just yet. I don't think he'll go down in price anytime soon, because his ownership has only decreased by 0.1% to 7.1%, but I don't think Ismaila Sarr will make it for that Sunderland fixture, and it's a massive shame because I thought Sarr would have been perfect on a wildcard for Game Week 4, partnering the likes of Semenyo, and you'll see the other names in my upcoming wildcard podcast. But now we have to be a bit creative with our midfield solutions, and ultimately taking a -4 hit for Chris Wood and Sarr compared to my alternative massively backfired and cost me around 20 FPL points. There is an element of misfortune there as well, and these things can happen in Fantasy Premier League with massive swings, and I think Sarr was a good long-term acquisition. He had 3 big chances so far this season, 2 goals, and obviously he scored against Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa back-to-back. 18 FPL points, and when you're looking at those Palace attackers, Jean-Philippe Mateta is now the clear standout, but Ismaila Sarr will unlikely feature in the next couple of weeks. Morgan Rogers was one of the breakout stars of Fantasy Premier League last season with a 5 million starting price, but he's been very disappointing in this new campaign. He has virtually played every single minute, but no goals and no assists. Just like Aston Villa, they're the only team in England's top 4 leagues to have not scored a single goal, and Rogers' ownership is decreasing quite rapidly actually compared to a couple of weeks ago where he had almost double the amount of ownership. It is now 8.5%, and we could see a price drop to 6.9 million over the next couple of days. His XGI is very concerning at only 0.35, 7 FPL points, but the most appealing thing, and a reason why a lot of us still have Ollie Watkins and or Rogers, is those upcoming fixtures against Everton away, Sunderland away, Fulham at home, and Burnley at home, and even Tottenham, where Aston Villa lost 4-1 last season at that particular stadium. Rogers walked away with a healthy return, and I think Rogers is capable of scoring against anybody, and you would expect him to bounce back and produce some FPL returns very soon. So maybe selling him this week could be a massive mistake. I talked about holding him only last week, but the major concern for me is just the lack of stats. There's no really any underlying performance, and ultimately when you've got the blanks, poor numbers, and what you see on the eye isn't quite good enough, ultimately I think Rogers would be the one worth selling, and you've got alternatives at this price point. Maybe not as many as we are led to believe, but Antoine Semenyo and Kudus would be major upgrades in this position, and they offer much better value at this moment in time. Some people might even point towards Jack Grealish, who's having a great start to his Everton career, and I would arguably go for that sort of pick instead, even though I'm not a massive fan of that Grealish pick personally. But Morgan Rogers is worth selling right now. This could change fairly soon, and I wouldn't blame you if you kept them for the next 2 to 4 game weeks to tackle those Sunderland and Burnley fixtures where Rogers and Watkins could come good. The most transferred in player by some distance is Jack Grealish, and that's why his price has risen to 6.7 million over the past week. He has been absolutely brilliant for Everton in the past 2 games, and whilst he did nothing against Leeds on his debut, he was a substitute in that game, and as soon as we saw him in that starting lineup, we have seen Everton transform offensively, and they're creating chances and linking up very well between all those wingers, the attacking midfielder, and even their striker. But I wouldn't recommend Beto or Tiano Barry. They will rotate, and I think they offer less value than Dewsbury Hall, who is looking really appealing at 5 million. Indai is solid at 6.5, and Jack Grealish might be the best of the lot right now with 4 assists, but there are no goals in there, and I don't think he'll score that many this season. But facing Aston Villa, his former club, I think Grealish will be motivated, so I don't mind him in such a fixture. But then it's Liverpool away, West Ham at home could be quite appealing, then Crystal Palace and Man City. So I think with Grealish, he is worth skipping at this moment in time, and because it's a loan, I don't think he'll face Man City there in Gameweek 8 either. Otherwise, that would be a nice fixture to target as well. So really, over the next 5, I'm expecting Grealish to do well in 2 of those games potentially, and at 6.7 million, that's not too shabby. I don't think he's a terrible pick, but he's not going to score that many goals. I expect a drop-off in the assists, and despite having a decent XA figure at 1.29, there is an overperformance there as well. But 22 FPL points is nothing to be scoffed at. He's getting bonus points on top of it, and the underlying numbers in general are pretty decent, with 1 big chance, 2 big chance created, and 5 key passes. But I think Jack Grealish is worth skipping, and if you have the likes of Dewsbury Hall or Indai, it's certainly not worth switching to another Toffees midfielder. The 11th and final player covered today is Richarlison, who has some really promising upcoming fixtures, and I think it's worth investing in a Tottenham attacker. But in the forward line, there are some good alternatives like Chris Wood for the next 3 game weeks, and I think the standouts will be Joao Pedro and Mateta over the next 5 overall. You've also got Erling Haaland, and I still think Ollie Watkins will come good, and if you were to keep any Aston Villa asset, it should be Ollie Watkins in my opinion. You've also got Alexander Isak, who will be one of the best forwards in Fantasy Premier League until the end of the season, and despite some tough fixtures, I still think Victor Gyökeres will score plenty of goals even in some of those challenging fixtures like Nottingham Forest and Manchester City, both at home. But Richarlison has 2 goals and 1 assist so far this season. He had a decent summer as well with the friendlies, 8 shots inside the box and 19 FPL points overall. The XG though is only 0.1 and the expected assist is 0.12 with no big chances and 1 big chance created. 2 key passes is decent, but Richarlison is very streaky. You can't rely on him until the end of the season. He's also had a few injury problems throughout his Tottenham career, and I still think Solanke is the better striker, and eventually he'll be the number 9, leading that front line for Thomas Frank and Tottenham Hotspur. So Richarlison for me is worth skipping. Xavi Simons might be one to watch out for at 7 million, and I think he's got a lot of potential, but the standout for me is Kudus in Fantasy Premier League. Brennan Johnson's had a decent start in terms of the goal contributions, but his performances haven't been that great, and that has been a problem since the back end of the previous campaign. And I think Spurs will score plenty of goals still in some of these really appealing fixtures on paper, but Richarlison won't be that reliable in the grand scheme of things. It's also worth highlighting the most transferred out players at this point of the game week, and Cole Palmer has been sold by almost 600,000 managers, and we haven't even begun the international break already. So it goes to show how much people are swinging their FPL teams a little bit and restructuring things. But if you have Cole Palmer up until this point, I don't think it's worth selling now. He could still start against Brentford if he's fully fit, and there's no risk of aggravating that injury. Sarr and Cunha is second. Chris Wood, Watkins and Wirtz are in the top 5. I think the last two could do brilliantly in Game Week 4, and Wirtz showed a better performance against Arsenal, albeit not quite good enough still, but there were moments of brilliance, and I think against Burnley, he is almost destined for a return if he starts that game, which I believe he will, and it's probably worth waiting out first before investing or selling the likes of Gakpo, Ekitike and Isak at this moment in time. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content for both FPL and UCL Fantasy, which will return very soon. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships. Click the join button on YouTube and type in patreon.com/FPL Dylan for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. There's my Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify. Leave a 5-star review, it goes a long way to supporting the channel. I'll see you very soon for even more deadline and reaction streams in a couple of weeks' time. And in the meantime, there will be UCL Fantasy and FPL videos.